Picture this. It's the summer of 1962. You're sitting in the back seat of a brand new Chevrolet Impala. The vinyl is hot against your thighs. The windows are rolled all the way down. The smell of cut grass and barbecue smoke drifts in from somewhere close. Your dad's got one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the door. And the radio, the actual radio, is playing Can't Help Falling in Love by Elvis Presley. Nobody is in a hurry. That moment, that specific, golden, unhurried moment. That is what people mean when they talk about the American dream. Not the abstract idea, the real, physical, almost edible version of it. But here's the thing. The dream was never quite as simple as the postcards made it look. By 1960, America was the richest country on earth. Full stop. The Second World War had ended 15 years earlier. While Europe was still stitching itself back together, the United States had boomed. Factories that once made bomber engines now churned out washing machines, refrigerators, and television sets. Levittown had sprung up in New York and Pennsylvania. Entire towns built almost overnight, row after row of nearly identical homes. A small lawn, a carport, a mortgage a working man could afford. The average American household income in 1960 was around $5,600 a year. A brand new house in the suburbs cost roughly $11,000. A new Ford Falcon cost $1,912. A gallon of milk was 26 cents. For the first time in history, ordinary people, factory workers, bus drivers, plumbers, could own a home. They could own a car, send their kids to school with a full belly. And here is what made it feel different from every generation before. Your parents had lived through the Depression. They knew what empty cupboards smelled like. They knew the particular silence of a house where the heating had been cut off. So, when they stood in their own kitchen, in their own home, with a refrigerator full of food, they didn't take a single moment of it for granted. That gratitude, that quiet, daily gratitude, it was built into everything. That was the dream. And for millions, it genuinely came true. Take a man like Robert Kowalski, Polish immigrant, arrived in Chicago in 1948 with $40 in his pocket and not a word of English. By 1961, he owned a 3-bedroom house in a suburb called Cicero. He worked the line at a steel plant on the south side. He drove a 1959 Buick LeSabre. His wife, Helena, kept a kitchen that smelled constantly of kielbasa and rye bread. Their 2 boys went to public school. On Friday evenings, the whole family watched the Ed Sullivan Show on a black and white RCA television. Robert had bought it on hire purchase, 12 monthly payments of $8. He never once took it for granted. In Poland, he told his boys, "Your grandfather worked a field he didn't own." Here, the house was his, the car was his, the life was his. That contrast, that before and after, is what gave the dream its power. But the dream came wrapped in a very specific package. A suburban house meant a car meant roads meant petrol. And petrol in 1960 cost 25 cents a gallon. So, you drove, everywhere, the drive-in cinema, the drive-through dairy, the shopping mall, a relatively new invention, spreading across America like wildfire, replacing the old downtown with something cleaner, wider, and easier to park at. By 1964, there were more than 7,600 shopping centers across the country. Sears, Roebuck & Co. had become a cathedral of consumer goods. You could buy a lawnmower, a wedding ring, a set of encyclopedias, and a pair of Levi's, all under one enormous roof. The smell of popcorn and floor polish, the squeak of new shoes on linoleum, the sound of cash registers, actual mechanical cash registers, ringing like church bells. Consumerism wasn't a dirty word yet, it was the proof. The physical, tangible, smell it and touch it proof that you had made it. Then came November 22, 1963. Dallas, a motorcade, a rifle shot, and in an instant, something shifted inside the dream. President John F. Kennedy had been the living embodiment of a new American confidence. Young, handsome, Harvard-educated, to small children who played on the White House lawn. In 1961, he had stood on a stage and promised the nation they would put a man on the moon. In October 1962, he stared down the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days that felt, 2 million of ordinary families, like the world might simply end. And they had come through it, together. So, when the news broke, when Walter Cronkite removed his glasses on CBS, something irreplaceable cracked. An estimated 93% of American households with televisions watched the funeral coverage. 93%. That is not a viewing figure. That is a collective grief. People stood in supermarket aisles and wept in front of strangers. Offices emptied. Schools fell silent. For 4 days, the entire country held its breath together. And something about that shared grief, painful as it was, reminded people of something important. That they were not alone, that they were one nation, that even inside the darkest moment, the fabric held. The dream was still there, but now it had a shadow. Still, life in mid-60s America had a texture to it that is almost impossible to recreate today. Monday nights meant Gunsmoke on CBS. Friday nights were for Bonanza. On Saturday mornings, children pulled themselves out of bed before their parents woke. They planted themselves to feet from the television. The Flintstones, Top Cat, the Jetsons, until the smell of frying bacon and Folgers coffee dragged them to the kitchen table. Breakfast was a production. Eggs, toast with butter, orange juice from a can of Minute Maid concentrate. The kitchen was the heart of the house, and the radio was always on. WABC in New York, WLS in Chicago, the Beach Boys, Roy Orbison, the Four Tops, music that felt like it was made of sunlight and optimism. School buses arrived at 7:45. Kids carried metal lunchboxes. Roy Rogers, Hopalong Cassidy, and then came the Beatles. They arrived on American shores in February 1964 and caused a joyful hysteria the country had never quite seen before. February 9, 1964, to 73 million people tuned into The Ed Sullivan Show. For young men from Liverpool, all my loving, 73 million viewers. In a country of 192 million, a generation decided in that single Sunday evening that the world was going to be different from now on. And they were right. Summer evenings had their own rhythm too. After dinner, nobody went inside. The neighborhood came alive after 6 o'clock. Fathers washed their cars in the driveway, the hose running cold water across the hot concrete. Mothers sat on porch steps, talking across the fence to the woman next door. Kids played until the street lights came on. And back then, that was the only curfew that mattered. Kick the can, hide and seek, running barefoot on warm asphalt. Nobody locked their front door. Nobody needed to. There was a trust to it. A sense that everyone on the street was in it together. That your neighbors were not strangers. They were an extension of your family. That feeling, that easy, unspoken neighborliness. It is one of the things the 60s did better than almost any decade before or since. Because here is the thing about the 1960s American dream that the postcards always left out. It was never just about the house, or the car, or the television set. It was about possibility. The feeling, electric, almost physical, that things were moving forward. That your children would have it better than you did. That the frontier wasn't closed, it had just changed shape. Dorothy Gaines, a school teacher in Memphis, Tennessee, remembered it this way. In 1965, she bought her first home on her own. A small two-bedroom bungalow on a quiet street with a magnolia tree in the front garden. She was 31 years old and single, still considered unusual for a woman buying property alone. She painted the front door red. She planted tomatoes in the back garden. She hung a wind chime on the porch that rang every time the summer air moved through it. Every morning when I unlocked my own front door, she said, I felt like somebody. That is the dream at its most real. Not the Chevrolet, not the shopping mall, just the quiet, private, profound satisfaction of owning something, of being somebody. Of course, the dream was not available equally to everyone. The prosperity was unevenly spread, the suburbs often deliberately segregated. The postcard version of America left many people standing outside looking in. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were hard-won battles, fought in the streets and the courtrooms, because the dream had to be demanded as much as it was inherited. The decade that promised everything also tested everything: Vietnam, assassinations, campus unrest. By 1968, the optimism of the early years had become something more complicated, more bruised. But here is what endures: the memory of a summer evening when the screen door slammed behind you. The whole neighborhood was outside. Kids on bikes, someone's dad manning a grill, the sound of a lawnmower to streets over, the specific smell of charcoal and lighter fluid. A cold bottle of Coca-Cola pressed against your palm. The sky going pink and orange over the rooftops. That image, that feeling, that has never entirely left us. We had less to choose from, but somehow it felt like more. The television had 3 channels and we watched it like it was a miracle, because for our parents, it was. The mall had fewer shops. The cars had no seat belts. The petrol cost pennies. The world felt smaller, closer, more knowable. Your neighbors knew your name. The guy at the corner store knew your order. The postman waved when he came up the path. There was a texture to daily life that no app, no algorithm, no streaming service has ever quite managed to replace. You were present because there was nowhere else to be. And maybe that is the real lesson the 60s leave behind. Not the cars, not the gadgets, not even the music, though the music was extraordinary. The lesson is simpler than all of that. When people feel secure, they are generous. When they feel they belong, they look out for each other. The dream was never really about things. It was about what those things represented. Safety, dignity, a future you could actually believe in. If you lived through the 1960s in America, or if your parents told you stories about it, you know exactly what I mean. There was something in the air then, a kind of confidence that things were going to be all right, that the future was a place worth heading towards. If this brought back memories, share it with someone who remembers. Please subscribe to keep these stories alive, and drop a comment below. Tell us where you grew up in the 60s, or what your family's version of the American dream looked like. We read every single one.